The physiology of fear. If there's one thing that people talk to me about in the recent past, it's fear. I'm afraid of this, I'm afraid that's going to happen. It's one of the things you learn when you study about fear. You choose how good you're going to be. And it's a good thing that I'm learning to do that. Because this morning, my computer would not boot up. So I had to get very creative in looking around and trying to find the pieces I needed to use to put the presentation together. But it happened. And I'm alive, and we have a team that works with me, so. All right. Presentation today is fear. It's neurobiology, meaning how does it affect your body and how does it affect your brain and nervous system? And is there an antidote for fear? And there is, which is a very good thing. We've talked several times before about emotions and feelings, so here's just a couple of summary statements so we're all on the same page with this. First of all, Lancet Medical Journal, the premier journal for Britain, research shows that emotions and feelings follow different pathways in the brain. It's important to understand that because in many languages, the word emotions and the word feelings are used synonymously, interchangeably. And they're different things. They're different mental faculties. And they do not even go on the same highway in the brain. So if you understand that, then you can start separating what happens to your body when an emotion arises, and then the feelings that your brain creates about that emotion. What do you do with that? So here's the definitions. Measurable physical responses caused by internal or external happenings. That's an emotion. It changes your body physiology to get your attention. Separate neuropeptides, separate brain chemicals, are connected with each emotion. So you cannot experience two core emotions at the same time. You can flip back and forth between them, among them, but you can't do it at the same time because there are different brain chemicals involved. Feelings. When an emotion arises and your brain realizes that your body's changing, and with all emotions you can get similar body changes. You can get perspiration on your forehead, your hands get clammy, your stomach can feel like it's filled with butterflies, your heart can beat faster, you can hold your breath or breathe more deeply. There's lots of changes and they're very similar, but they tell you an emotion just arose. And the brain always wants to make sense of things. It creates its own explanations sometimes, depending on how much you know or don't know about something. The word feelings is the term for these explanations that your brain has created. Because your brain creates your feelings, you can change them anytime you want to, given that your brain is within normal limits. Because your brain created them. So how do you change how you feel? You just change the way you think. Because your thinking creates your feelings. And that's one of the most marvelous brain function pieces I have ever learned. It's so powerful to know that in general you do not have to be a victim of the feeling that your brain happens to create. You can do something about that, and it's wonderful. Fear. It's one of the 4 core emotions, and we'll talk about those 4 a little bit today. It's automatically induced, meaning you don't stand there and say, I think I'll be afraid right now. maybe I should be fearful for a while. No, that's not what happens. When the brain perceives a real threat, something is unsafe, or you've got an imaginary threat, imaginary fear, and every one of us in this room has imaginary fears. And you need to identify them and get a handle on them, because if you don't, those imaginary fears are going to be triggering the emotion of fear unnecessarily. So fear is automatically triggered as soon as something happens that makes the brain feel unsafe. It can be real or it can be imagined. Now, when the emotion of fear arises, no surprise, remember, there are different neuropeptides associated with every core emotion: joy, anger, fear, and sadness. And when fear is triggered, then it's going to change the neurochemistry in your brain and body. And the first thing that it's going to do is release something called CRF. And I don't care if you remember that or not, but I like you to know that I know the whole word for the acronym. Corticotropin releasing factor. But most of us just say CRF for short because it is a long label. This is a very, very, very powerful neurotransmitter hormone combination. So as soon as the brain perceives a threat, it releases here in the mammalian second brain layer this CRF, which in turn then goes down to the alarm center here in the brain stem, that first layer, the reptilian layer. And then a whole bunch of other chemicals follow that. Norepinephrine, which is a messenger, and goes to every cell in the body saying, wake up here, we have a problem, we're not safe, there's something going on here. And then cortisol is going to be released, the stress hormone, which is designed to help you deal with something for a short, immediate bit of time. But if you keep hanging on to that, that's when you're going to get all kinds of negative brain and body responses. And then adrenaline goes up, and adrenaline, you know, gives you energy to take action. One episode of fear that you didn't choose, it happened automatically, unless it's an imaginary fear and you therefore didn't choose to deal with the imaginary fear, so it keeps triggering this. One episode can take 72 hours to recover from because all of the stuff the brain pours out is so strong. I would bet you that you know people who have not recovered from fear episodes because they keep triggering them. And they're living in a state of complete unbalance and deteriorating their health and so on. But once you get it, that's what's exciting about this, you can do something about it. So if you stay up till 2 o'clock in the morning and you watch a really scary movie about, you know, somebody getting hacked to pieces with a chainsaw, and then you wake up in the middle of the night in a cold sweat screaming because you're dreaming that somebody's doing that to you, you have just majorly triggered fear, but you did it because you put that into your brain and it is responding to that. Because whatever you think about, the brain thinks that you think it's important, so it better help you think about it. On the other hand, if somebody should come crashing through the door with an automatic rifle and start shooting the lights out, you didn't do anything to cause that. And the emotion of fear will be triggered, and it will hopefully help you deal with that. I'll tell you, if that happened to me, I'd be the first person on the floor in the hall, notwithstanding 2 artificial hips. I'm programmed that that's what they would do. So, it's triggered by something outside of you or by something inside of you. And we can do things to prevent that based on how we live our lives. So growing up, what did you learn about fear? It's important, I think, to go back and ask yourself, what did I learn about in terms of fear growing up? You know, in my family, I learned that, you know, it wasn't okay for boys to be fearful. You know, that was a sissy. You know, boys and men had to be strong. They're human beings. They feel fear just as much as the rest of us. Although studies show they tend to stuff it. So here's this 17-year-old that wants to go in the armed services and wants to go to Pakistan or Iraq or whatever. And I'm going, do they have any idea what they're signing up for? But they feel invincible. They don't feel the potential fear that that enlistment could cause. And I'm not saying they shouldn't enlist, but at 17, their brains are not even close to being developed, much less mature. And I was talking to I don't know, somebody with 5 or 10 stars on their jacket, however many that was. And I said, you know, if you only accepted people into the armed forces at the age of 30, and I didn't even have to finish, he said, we wouldn't have anybody in the armed services. Because they would begin to evaluate the potential, the risk for danger. So what did you learn? What was role modeled? What was your home atmosphere like? Was your home atmosphere positive? I can do this. We need to have a team to accomplish this. Or were you scared? I can't get it right. I'm not going to do it right. I'm going to screw up. You know, people are going to be unhappy about me, with me. So what was the atmosphere like? Because we learn in childhood how to respond to many situations in adulthood. And if we're not doing it in a way that's working for us, then we need to change the way we think. I didn't grow up knowing that all emotions were positive. How many of you grew up learning they were all positive? One person. Good for you. I learned that joy was positive. But fear, anger, and sadness were negative, and that's erroneous. They're all positive because they're all given to us to help us manage specific situations in life. It's the behaviors that people exhibit around those 3 protective emotions that are negative, but not the emotions. If you can't deal with anger, you will probably be unable to set your boundaries, and they'll be regularly invaded. If you cannot deal with fear, you won't be able to keep yourself safe, or you will become way too invested in trying to be safe and not interact well with the world. And if you don't know how to deal with sadness, then you won't be able to effectively recover from loss and move on. But it's the behaviors that are often negative. The reason I only talk about 4 core emotions, fear being one of them, is because those 4, joy, anger, fear, and sadness, are the ones that can be seen on the face of the fetus during pregnancy, depending on what's happening to the mother. And apathy, at the bottom of the emotion staircase, is not an emotion either. But it describes a person who has not learned or been able to manage their emotions, and so now they have an overwhelm, especially of the protective emotions, and they're just almost immobile because there's this vast backlog of unresolved emotion. PET scan studies, positron emission tomography, and that's what has become so exciting about brain function. As we get these pieces of equipment that let us actually watch the brain while the person's still alive and see what it's doing is very exciting. So PET scans have shown that when the person in the PET scan, when the brain that's being scanned is feeling joy, and the researchers will say, think of something in your life, a time when you were really, really joyful about something. It's the left hemisphere that lights up. When the protective emotions, anger, fear, and sadness, are present, any one of them, it's the right hemisphere that lights up. So the protective emotions seem to be aligned with the right hemisphere and joy with the left. Why would that be? Researchers say because the right hemisphere has more of those long neuron pathways wrapped with myelin. It's like the road's been paved. And therefore, the speed of transmission is much faster in the right hemisphere. More than 600 miles per hour. The messages will fly through the right hemisphere, which is much faster than what usually happens in the left hemisphere. So because these are protective and they're designed to give you information so you can take care of yourself, and that needs to happen in a hurry, they believe that's the reason that the protective emotions trigger the PET scans to light up in the right hemisphere. Kind of interesting. So the emotion of fear is a signal that you are in danger or that you think you're in danger. It can be real, as I said, and actual, or it can be imaginary. And what we're finding is that imaginary fear tends to trigger the stress response way more than actual fear. This sense of being unsafe. And therefore, if you're triggering it because of imagined fear, you're getting this huge response to your brain and body which was not necessary. So what might be some of these imaginary fears? I think I've got a list of them. But let's preface that by saying the ability to identify an emotion accurately and then decide how you're going to deal with it is critical. Because I mentioned earlier that the signs and symptoms in your body physiology are very similar for the emotions. So when something triggers these physiological changes, then I ask myself, what just happened, what is happening, what might be going to happen that would trigger an emotion, and which one is probably being triggered? And you can figure that out because it'll be a different response. Some of the big fears used to be public speaking was number one, followed by airplane travel. Did you know that? Well, it is, public speaking is not the number one fear right now. It's natural disasters, followed by terrorism. Then we get to airline travel, and then we get to public speaking, and then we get to aging, and then there's a whole bunch of others. So those are big fears for a lot of people. And I recognize the risk, but I choose how fearful I'm going to be about that. I'm getting ready to fly to Perth, Australia next month. That's a long flight. That's 20 hours. And then a month after that, I fly to Sydney for 4 weeks. So we have to be really careful what we schedule because I'll be across the pond for a month. And I have to fly in a plane that hopefully is going to get straight there because there's no place to land between here and there. Now, I could let myself get terrified and decide not to go. Or I can say, well, it's a risk. But every time I get in my car, it's a risk. I could get out of bed and I could trip on a rug and hit my head on something and be dead in a nanosecond. So I try to fly with what I think is an appropriate airline. I'm not going to fly with some airline that started up yesterday and has no track record. But, you know, you make a choice. And I choose to go to Australia. Yes, it's a risk. But it's a risk that I'm willing to manage because I've thought about it and I choose to go. These are the kind of risks that get most people. They also form the basis for a lot of addictive behaviors. Because if you think, I'm not good looking enough, you're likely to get involved with some kind of addictive behavior that's going to make you feel better, because thinking you don't look good enough is not a good feeling. And everybody is just fine the way they are, because we're all different. We have different brains, we have different looks. We can do the best we can with the looks we have, but they're my look, your look, and they're just fine. Don't fit in, feel different? Well, get a clue here, folks. There's no two brains on the planet that are the same, so every one of us is going to feel different. And we don't fit into what? I fit into life just fine, from my brain's opinion, but it wasn't the opinion of my family. They thought I was way out here. The brain? Who cares about the brain? I care about the brain because I got one. And I need to learn how to take care of it. So fitting in is an expectation that goes nowhere, in my brain's opinion. Can't land a good job? Sure you can. You know, you might have to be creative. You might have to create your own. I was talking to Anita, pretty soon I can call her doctor. When I got my first PhD, there was not one single university I contacted, and I contacted 13 of them that had a doctoral program that related to brain function. So I proposed to them, this is what I want, can you do this for me? And 3 of them said, yes, we can. So it happened. But sometimes you have to be creative. Unlovable? Well, are you unlovable? Because if you think you are, you can change those behaviors that made some people think you were unlovable. But even when you do that, not everybody's going to love you, so get over it. You don't love everybody. I mean, I can be polite to everybody, but I don't love everybody. You know, our brains just don't connect. But that's real. So if you think you're only okay if everybody loves you, you're never going to be okay, because everybody is not going to love you. Probably not even your dog. I remember when I got a poodle, my first poodle. My dad would not let me have a pet. He said we travel too much. So I got a poodle, and the poodle loved me until my husband came home from work. And then the poodle completely transferred all her love and attention to him. Okay, so that's not a problem. Some pets react to brains differently. I just knew that when he left for work, she'd love me again. Okay, that's fine. Got nothing to do with me. And so on and so forth. Do you get it? So what are your imaginary fears? Deal with them. Otherwise, they're going to be triggering the stress response, and that will not be good for your brain and body. The problem with imagined fear is this. It may even be more prolonged in impact than an actual situation where you'll feel unsafe, because fear tends to hang around in working memory or in your mind's eye. So if it's an imaginary fear, you can trigger that 24 hours a day, when a real fear might not arise only once a month. You know, unless you think every time you get in the car that you probably won't get home. If you cannot manage fear, or you have all these imagined fears, they'll kill ideas. Have you heard of writer's block? All that is, they're afraid they can't write another book as good as the last one, or that they're never going to write a book that's any good at all. And suddenly they can't write anything. And musicians have musician's block, and so on and so forth. Speakers have speaker's block. I remember one time I was making a presentation. There were 6 of us. It was so interesting. We were all gathered in one of those little rooms off stage because we were going on one at a time. And one of the speakers, who looked pretty classy, was pacing back and forth and perspiring and so on. And finally I said, "Are you not feeling well?" And the speaker said, "Oh, I always get like this before I have to speak because I'm terrified I'll do a terrible job." And I said, "Well, you probably will." And the speaker looked at me and I said, "If you think you can or you think you can't, you're right. So what does this get you?" The speaker says, "I don't know, I just always do it." And I said, "Well, stop it. Tell yourself, Arlene, you are doing a good job. You are remembering what you want to say. People are learning something." They looked at me like I was from another planet. But that's triggering your own stress response. So on and so forth. And if it goes on long enough, you probably will develop a phobia in that middle layer. You may even go all the way down to apathy. That's no fun for anybody to be around someone who's apathetic. It will contribute to illness and disease. It will lock down your prefrontal cortex. We've talked about that in the context of downshifting. You lose access to all of these critical brain prefrontal cortex functions that distinguish us from animals. Joseph Chilton Pearce is, I think he's a wonderful brain researcher. I love the things that he has researched. And he said this: any fear or anger, if you hang on to it, shifts energy and attention from the neocortex, this third layer, right down to the first layer, the reptilian layer. And that's all about fight, flight, tend, befriend, conserve, withdraw, all of those stress responses. And you lose easy access to all of these wonderful prefrontal cortex functions like abstract thinking, planning, conscience, decision making. That's what makes us human. We can make choices. And you have lost easy access to those. There are some male-female differences when it comes to fear, and I alluded to one of those. Males are socialized to discount risk. You know, "Oh, I'm going to be fine." Well, I hope you are. But you might want to think about what you're facing. And they tend to exhibit fear in several different ways, because it's not masculine to say you're afraid. They tend to exhibit it first as anger, sometimes as excessive control. They have to be in charge of everything, even how many breaths you take per minute, because they feel safer when they think they're in control, which is a complete illusion. Inflexibility, they just can't go with the flow. I had planned to do this today, and now I have a flat tire and my whole month is ruined. No, it isn't. You fix the flat tire. You'll see them developing sometimes behaviors that are like OCD. Worrying about things. Did you turn the iron off at home? No, because I never turned it on. And a dictatorship style of leadership. Again, trying to feel safe. And it's not my responsibility, but it does help me when I see a male suddenly trying to tell me every move that I need to make, that probably fear is underlying that. And by the illusion of being in control, they're feeling safer. Females are not socialized to discount risk, but to avoid it. Therefore, they're often a little more fearful of taking a risk. Well, do I really want to enroll in a doctoral program, because what if I didn't pass? That would be so embarrassing. Well, if you didn't pass, you'd take the test again, for heaven's sake. Lots of people do. Attorneys, national statistics, half of them flunk the first time they take the boards. A lot of them don't try again. But those who do usually pass. Females might exhibit fear directly. You know, I'm really scared of that. Or they'll express it through sadness. I'm really sad about that. No, they're scared, but it's a little bit hard to admit. And they're much more likely to express fear through tears because, again, males have been so socialized not to tear up that even if they feel deep emotion, they'll try to stuff it. So there are some differences. So anxiety, which is a common form of fear, those disorders are the most common mental illnesses in the United States. And it's interesting that they're calling them mental illnesses because the continual anxiety can keep the brain downshifted and can keep triggering the stress responses. 40 million adults over the age of 18, that's almost 18% of the population at any given time, are embroiled in an anxiety disorder. And it costs this country a third of the $148 billion, that's almost $50 billion a year, just because people are fearful. I mentioned this earlier, this is Joseph Ledoux. Emotional processes, and fear is an emotional process, operate at a much higher speed than thoughts. And because of that, often bypass the mind's linear reasoning process entirely. You remember the 3 brain layers. You know, think of your fist as the reptilian, your wrist as the reptilian layer, your fist as the mammalian layer. Put your other hand over the top, and there's your neocortex. Emotional processes arise in this second layer where there's no conscious thought. And because the speed of transmission goes so quickly, it may never get up to this neocortex where you have conscious thought. It may go directly down to the reptilian layer, and now you're in this reaction without even realizing it. And depending on how you have learned to deal with things, you might punch somebody and change the shape of their nose. You might go out and crash your car and now be in the hospital for 6 months. You know, people who do those knee-jerk reactions often spend a lot of time paying for what they did. So there's the drawing of the 3 layers. And because of the speed at which emotional processes occur, and because they are triggered here in the middle layer, that means you have reduced easy access to these critical 3rd layer brain functions. And and if you go clear down to the 1st layer, all you have are the stress response reactions. So what are some of those? We mentioned some. Learning and then recalling what you learned. So these little kids come to school fearful because of the type of home environment they have. They can't learn. And then everybody tells them they're stupid, and that further downshifts them. Problem solving, it's just like writer's block. You have a problem and you can't figure out well, my car has a flat tire. Well, hello, what are your options? I don't know. Well, do you have AAA? Yes. Do you have a cell phone? Yes. Call AAA. Oh. You know, unable to do that on your own. Cause and effect reasoning. If I do this, then I can pretty much expect that. So you tell a kid whose brain isn't done, speed limit 65. You insist on going down Highway 5 at 90. The likelihood of you getting pulled over and losing your license is very, very high. That would be the effect of going 25 miles an hour over the speed limit. Really. rational and logical thinking and planning and choosing. So it's critical. Fear is marvelous if you are in actual danger. If you're not, it's lethal. It will accelerate the aging process, and as I mentioned, that's no place I plan on going. This is the problem with addictive behaviors. If you have a serious addictive behavior and you are in the process of learning new strategies to deal with whatever caused you to develop the addictive behavior, and you're in that middle layer, you're going to reactivate your old habit patterns, because in that middle layer, there's no awareness of the future. There's only awareness of the present and the past. So we would see this when I worked with addictive behavior programs. Somebody would come in, for example, they're trying to, let's say, change their behaviors related to cocaine or heroin, because heroin is pretty difficult. Although cigarette smoking, tobacco is the #1 worldwide most difficult behavior, but any of those. So they're downshifted because they're fearful they can't go through the recovery program and be successful. And they start feeling not good, and the brain wants to feel good, and that's great. It should feel good. But they start thinking to themselves, almost subconsciously, I don't feel good. What did I do last time when I didn't feel good? Oh yeah, I smoked. Oh yes, I shot up some heroin. Oh yeah, I had some cocaine. Okay, I need to do that right now to feel better. And they've already relapsed. And so the first thing we would try to teach them is how to stay upshifted, because when you get to that top layer, then the brain is more likely to say, wait a minute, yeah, in the past, that's what you did to feel better, but we have a new plan for the future. This is our strategy, and that can help them not relapse. Definitely suppress the immune system, which is going to increase your risk for disease. Now, this is one of the things that I would show the group of people in the addictive behavior program to see who was upshifted. And it never failed. So, how many boxes? Quickly. 17, better. 21, even better.
A lot.
A lot. There you go. They could not do abstract thought, because that's a prefrontal cortex 3rd layer function. They could only do the literal stuff. Count. 4, 8, 12, 16, big one, 17. Or sometimes, even the 1st layer, if you've learned math, can do 4 times 4. So I would say, anybody get more than 17?
Yeah, you got 21 because you got 4 boxes. Yeah.
There's a lot more than 21. So
yeah.
Go home and draw this out and practice abstract thinking. But they couldn't do it, which means it told me that if they were challenged in the area from which they were trying to recover, they were most likely going to be downshifted, and they could not do abstract thinking and think about, oh, I have a new plan. Here's another one. What do you see first? Good. What else do you see?
Liar.
Good. Yes, the word liar is there. Everybody see that?
Oh, yeah.
Please tell me that you see it. Otherwise, I'm going to get a little anxious. No, I'm not. Who sees some numbers?
Number 6.
There's a 6. What else?
A 0.
There's a 0. What else?
An 8.
There's a 9. What about this one? What is that one?
J.
A 7 upside down. What about this one? 3. What about this one? They couldn't get those, because again, that's abstract thinking. And they didn't get the word liar until I turned the whole picture over. So it's real what happens to the brain when it gets involved in this fear cycle. So what's the antidote for fear? The only one that's ever been identified is gratitude. Because gratitude is a 3rd layer function part of the emotion of joy. So, when you feel fearful, you are likely downshifting, going to the third layer or the first layer. If you can think of something quickly for which to be thankful, you will upshift, because thankfulness is in the third layer in the frontal left quadrant. So there are antidotes. You just have to know them, and you have to be prepared to use them. I did not grow up in a family that was filled with gratitude. I would have to say the atmosphere in our home was one of fear. Can we get it right? Are we going to screw up? You know, are we going to be embarrassed? And I finally learned that embarrassment's a choice. I don't go there anymore. I mean, if I knock something over, I apologize, but I'm not going to spend the next month being embarrassed because I knocked something over. I'll try to replace it if I can, and whatever, but those are choices that we make. While fear downshifts the brain, gratitude upshifts it. So I had to learn to be continually grateful. And that's not hard to do once you get the picture. I could not do what I do without a team. And today that was really important because my computer would not boot up. So it took everybody here figuring out how I was going to get what I needed on my thumb, and it happened. And I don't think I downshifted. Came close a couple times, but don't think I downshifted because I trust the team. And we don't do anything in life without a team, for which I am grateful. So I have learned the last thing before I go to sleep at night, I think of something to be grateful for. And the first thing in the morning when I wake up, I think of something for which to be grateful. And several times throughout the day. So I'm learning that if fear was triggered, especially imagined fear, I know how to get upshifted. And I got a whole bank of things for which I am thankful. And every brain can do that. So here's the bottom line. Fear and gratitude cannot simultaneously coexist in the brain. Remember, separate neuropeptides. It's one or the other. And occasionally I'll flip back and forth. I was lecturing in another country. And boy, one of the presenters was a well-known icon in that country. And I thought, oh my goodness, here I am from another country, and I wonder how this is going to go over. And immediately I had to be grateful for the opportunity to see how this experience was going to work out. And wouldn't you know it, 5 minutes later I'm thinking, what am I doing here? And I have to be grateful again. But you can do that. It's a choice. Gratitude is a vaccine, antitoxin, and antiseptic. That's how John Henry Jowett put it. That's pretty powerful. That's a lot. And if I were doing it, I would add, and it's an upshifter. It gets you back up there to the cognitive part of the brain. You have a stage in your brain. I think we've talked about this before. And it's, I know what my stage looks like. I don't know what your stage looks like. Mine's pretty elaborate. Because when you're doing it in your mind, money is no object. So my stage is a it's a half circle, about 4 steps. It's made out of pure Carrara marble directly from Italy. There's a whole row of Corinthian pillars at the back of my stage. I love Corinthian pillars. They're not gold-plated, hello, they're 24 karat solid gold. I have a room on each side of the stage, as you would have on any Broadway stage. I am on the stage of my brain every moment, every second that I'm alive, and so are you. I have 4 assistants to help me manage every imaginable type of situation in life: joy, anger, fear, and sadness. But here's the kicker. Only one assistant can be on stage with you or me at a time. Because remember, they have different peptides. And joy is the one I want to be on stage with all the time, unless there's a bona fide something for which one of the other assistants needs to give me information. And then I want to get the information and get them back in the wings and get joy back out on stage with me. You do that by how you think. So as I was saying earlier, joy is on stage with me and somebody crashes in with a repeating rifle. All right, I can't imagine anybody who would not have actual fear pop out there and kick joy off. And then there might be some anger because our boundaries are being invaded. Hello? And so anger and fear might go back and forth, and let's say that they hit something, it fell off and injured one of the participants. Okay, then sadness might pop out and say, I'm really sad that happened. But my goal is to deal with whatever one or more of those assistants are telling me in order, back and forth if necessary, but I want joy back out here on stage with me. Because that's how my brain and body function most accurately and efficiently and for a long time. So we come to Franklin D. Roosevelt, and no, I didn't know him personally. I was talking about this the other day to a group of college kids, and one of the kids says, Dr. Taylor, did you know Franklin D. Roosevelt?
And you said yes.
I said, theoretically I did, but literally I did not meet the man. Oh. He said, there's nothing to fear but fear itself, which I think is profound now that we're learning so much in terms of brain function with the brain scans. I don't fear bona fide fear, but I could fear, imagine fear, and I could fear hanging on to fear unnecessarily, but I don't do that because we're learning how to manage it. And those of you who are scriptural students, you know that the Apostle Paul said, be anxious about nothing. What's the most common mental illness in the United States? Anxiety disorders. And what did the Apostle Paul tell us? Be anxious about what? Nothing. You just get the information and deal with it. But that's a learned step for most of us. Because if my parents had known that, I think they would have taught me that. But their parents didn't know it, and their grandparents didn't know it, and their great-grandparents didn't know it, and you can only know what you know. But that's what's marvelous about getting the information. So gratitude is the antidote, and every one of us has a choice. You choose to become immobilized by the fear, or you develop the skills to manage it appropriately and effectively. And if I can learn to do that, anybody can. Henry Ford. No, I didn't know him personally either. But my first car was a Ford station wagon. Read this with me. If you think you can, or you think you can't, you're right. It all starts in your brain. The fear starts in your brain. The antidote starts in your brain. The choice starts in your brain. The access to willpower to invoke the antidote starts in your brain. In fact, some people have said that the main job of your body is just to carry your brain around. And that's probably true, because your brain would go nowhere except in imagination if your body didn't carry it around. And that's the whole point, for me, of keeping your body healthy. I mean, it's less about your body, it's more about your brain, because my body needs to be healthy to carry my brain around. And my brain has to be healthy to function properly as it gets carried around. So you can see how it's a symbiotic relationship, if you want. So that's the reason I strive, put the pieces in place, live those pieces, because we know that not everything can be prevented. We're all clear about that, right? Not everything can be prevented. But I'm equally clear that nothing can be prevented unless individuals implement appropriate preventive strategies. You don't prevent something by wishing. You don't prevent insulin resistance by having a lifestyle that contributes to insulin resistance and then saying, oh, I wish, that I wasn't insulin resistant. And even when something was preventable and we didn't prevent it, it's often not too late. We can start doing something now, and we know that things can be reversed. Managing fear appropriately and avoiding downshifting and overreaction and all the stuff that comes from repetitive triggering of stress reactions, I believe, my brain's opinion, is easier to accomplish when both your brain and body are working well. I was listening to a commentator driving here today who said that in the last 20 years, the content of the food that's marketed in the United States is about 75% less content-wise for vitamins, minerals, enzymes, and so on. That it's pathetic. We're basically eating garbage if we're not careful with what we're doing. I do my best to select good food, but when you travel, sometimes there are not a lot of options. And your options are don't eat or be really picky about what you do eat. I think that I need more than that. I need something to help compensate for the fact that our food, just the delivery system, often destroys much of the minerals and enzymes in the food. And I personally was very fortunate to meet Greg M. in the last century. Don't you like to say that? In the last century. And I got introduced first to Enterprime. And Enterprime for me, I take it because I think it helps compensate for what we are no longer getting in our food. And then I was introduced to Delta E, which I had to do my own research about. Not that I didn't trust Greg, but I had to do my own research because I'm so careful about the caffeine that I ingest. But I realized that caffeine is the cofactor for L-theanine, which is critically important for my brain and which begins to fall midlife. And that there was only enough caffeine in there to trigger the cofactor, and it was treated in such a way that we're not getting the harmful effects of caffeine, which is pretty exciting. Because now there's research that shows some amount of caffeine every day for some brains may help prevent certain types of dementia. So I started taking Delta E, and it is with me in my purse, in my suitcase, every place I travel. Because my brain needs that B12 and L-theanine. Yours might not, mine does. And the last piece was the alkaline water. You know, I used to drink alkaline water whenever I had it easily available. But as I'm studying about the brain and the body and dehydration, and I suppose that it's better to drink water of any kind than not get it. But it's like everything else. There's water that seems to be better for the brain and body. And the thing I miss most when I travel is my Ion Thrive machine, where I can get, you know, this wonderful purified alkaline water, and the body is not continually subjected to acid water that it's got to do something about. So when you think about health, when you think about fear, when you think about choice, when you think about your body designed to carry your brain around, and how do you keep them healthy, these are my personal strategies that I use every single day. So I recommend that you find strategies for your brain and body that's going to help keep both of them at peak performance so you can stay healthier and younger for longer. Thank you.